You are watching DHTV from California State University, Dominguez Hills.
My name is Bill Allen. I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, the LAEDC, to many of you who are here this evening. It's my pleasure on behalf of all my colleagues on the staff and board of the LAEDC to welcome you all to the latest in our series of Future Forum events, tonight appropriately focused on the future of space commercialization. We've got a wonderful lineup of presenters for you this evening who are going to share their insights with you. And we hope that you'll participate in conversation with us here in the room during the Q&A session and also online by using the hashtag LAEDC Future Forum that you see on the screen, and there may be other handles on the screen you can use for our social media conversation. You may have noticed we didn't print program books again. We do this out of respect for our environment, but we do provide you with our full speaker lineup and bios on all our impressive presenters available on your smartphone. You can type in the URL you see on the screen to access those, or you can access that from the email that was sent to you yesterday confirming your participation in the program this evening. Briefly, the LAEDC's purpose is to collectively advance opportunity and prosperity for all the residents of the greater LA area region. We do this by focusing on 7 aspirational goals that we developed with leaders from business, government, education, environmental communities, faith-based communities. Really, all stakeholder voices across LA County participated in the development of these plans. These 7 goals were designed to try and create a more sustainable, a more inclusive, a more vibrant, a more diverse economy for the benefit of the 10 million people who live in this county. The strategic plan has a second goal specifically calling out strengthening our region's leading export-oriented industry clusters. One of these is, of course, aerospace and defense. Tonight's forum topic is on an important aspect of the evolution of this A&D sector, space commercialization. The forum brings together leading industry experts who will discuss personal space travel, the new Space Force, space ecosystems in our county, and the need for talent to keep the industry growing here. Contrary to reports of aerospace's demise in Southern California since the 1990s, the region remains a very large base of manufacturing, research and design capabilities, and strengths in aerospace and defense. Moreover, the face and the business models associated with the industry have changed dramatically since the turn of the 21st century, with the industry becoming less Pentagon-focused, less dependent on procurement options with the Defense Department, and more consumer-facing with the rise of space commercialization, cybersecurity and privacy applications, and unmanned technologies and systems here in Southern California. Equally important, but less well-known, is that aerospace is a major driver of innovation across many industries, whether it's advances in the industry's robotics testing, sensing, and actuation capabilities that have been adapted to create more functional artificial limbs in our health science and prosthetics industries, or the broad deployment of aerospace industry-led improvements in autonomy and 3D printing that are deployed across many other industries. Aerospace remains one of the world's great seeders and developers of cross-industry invention and advancement. And the future for aerospace-driven innovation here in Southern California looks even brighter, as once dreamy concepts as private space travel and tourism, computer chip-sized nanoprobes, and even electric airliners are now moving from imagination towards tangible existence. For this reason, the LAEDC is looking for funding, and some of you may want to participate with this. It would be the latest in our series of deep dives into legacy and emerging industry clusters in this region, but we're looking to do an exhaustive study of Southern California's prominence and prowess in this new consumer-focused aerospace industry, quantifying it in terms of current concentrations, productive advantages, employment, establishment and wages at the regional and county levels for all 8 counties in Southern California, and looking at other indicators of activity such as venture capital inflows, research spending, and other orders, and patent filings. Current industry sector employment concentrations will be compared to other regions to illustrate our region's specialization. We will, of course, include an assessment of emerging industries within the larger aerospace and defense industries, such as cybersecurity, unmanned aerial systems, and space commercialization. If you're interested in working with us on that, please do contact me or any of my colleagues here tonight from the LAEDC. To put on these sorts of events, we need partners, and we've had the best partner we could ever hope for in California State University, Dominguez Hills since the very inception of this series of events. when the leadership at the university recognized how important it is for more of us in this region to understand what's going on in the evolution of these critically important industries. Cal State Dominguez Hills is a diverse, welcoming institution, a community of learners and educators collaborating to change lives and communities for the better. And the leader of that, the 11th president of that institution, is Thomas Parham. And I'm going to invite him up to say a few words, but I want you to know he's an extraordinary leader at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Came to us from the vice chancellor role at UC Irvine. He's a published author. He's a great community leader even beyond the confines of his campus, but he's doing wonderful, wonderful things on that campus to ensure that we have the next generation of students to power each and every one of our industry clusters. Would you welcome Tom Parham to make a couple of welcome remarks?
Let me say good evening. Good evening. Let me say good evening to the rest of you. Good evening. The poetic stylings of Dr. Maya Angelou remind us, my life has been long. In believing that life loves the liver of it, I've dared to try many things, sometimes trembling, but daring still. I am Dr. Thomas Parham. I am the 11th president, as Bill mentioned, of Cal State University, Dominguez Hills, an urban metropolitan regional comprehensive institution characterized by an unparalleled diversity in student body. I'm joined tonight by a number of academic officers, assistant vice presidents of staff. Let me invite you real quickly to stand up, and the chair of our foundation, as well as faculty. If you would all stand up and be recognized. This is our team. Maria, please stand. Kamal, please stand. Nice to see everybody here. This is the 4th year that the university has served as the sponsor and partner of these always illuminating events, and we are proud of our ongoing partnership with the LAEDC. So I want to add my voice to the chorus of those that have said congratulations and thank you again to a significant leader who is consequential in the things that he's doing, and that's Bill Allen. I want you to make sure you recognize Bill Allen and the LAEDC for that. Now, these future forums present us with exciting visions of the future. Today's speakers, I think, will provide intriguing insights into one of the most futuristic topics imaginable, space commercialization. In fact, when people hear the word future, the first image that often comes to mind is that of spaceships whizzing into the stars, right? In the same way that Star Trek dubbed it, right, that final frontier. We were just waxing on that, I think, with our panel here. But we're still a long way from being able to hop aboard the Starship Enterprise or beam me up Scotty and Scotty's transporter. But our speakers today are helping propel aerospace industry forward in unique and exciting ways. When the day arrives that we will really do engage in a fleet of interstellar cruisers, it will be due to the diligent, forward-thinking work of men and women like those who are joining us here today. The new innovations that are happening in educational institutions are designed to try to support the workforce you will need to be able to do exactly that. We have a brand new 91,000 square foot facility that'll house teaching and research laboratory space for chemistry, biology, physics courses. It is the first new science building with any portion of state money we've built on that campus in 25 years. It is just a game changer for us. And so we celebrate that on that site. We will be making also a place for a fabrication lab. And that fab lab will allow students to create physical objects that were previously confined only to their fertile imaginations. So just imagine students dreaming about the possibilities, but being able to manufacture those in that fabrication lab. And that new Science and Innovation building will also provide a home for our Center for Innovation in STEM Education, a project spearheaded by our award-winning professor, Dr. Kamal Hamden. If you would stand to be recognized. This man is one of those geniuses we have on campus, not only training students, but also training teachers to train the next generation of STEM education folks. So these mobile fab labs are an exciting way, I think, that we bring science to youth, and we love that. These students, in turn, will grow up to create a next wave of innovation as the aerospace industry continues to expand in a yet undreamed of ways. When science and technology companies look to hire new minds from diverse backgrounds and possessing unique cultural sensibilities, they need look no further than Cal State University, Dominguez Hills, and the other 22 sister campuses of the California State University system for innovative young scholars and dreamers that our institutions produce. With that in mind, I want to close with a quote from famed astronaut Dr. Mae Jemison, who asserts that failure to recognize possibility is the most dangerous and common mistake one can make. Aren't we fortunate to see that our speakers today have not failed to recognize possibilities? Welcome to this year's January Forum. Congratulations on being here. I look forward to hearing from our speakers. Thank you very much.
Dr. Parham, thank you as always for your inspirational leadership and for the great engine of social and economic mobility that your institution represents. Great to partner with you. So let's get on with the program. I have the pleasure of introducing an extraordinary keynote speaker. Virgin Galactic is the world's first commercial spaceline and vertically integrated aerospace company pioneering human spaceflight for private individuals and researchers. The company's leadership believes the commercial exploration of space represents one of the most exciting and significant technology initiatives of our time, and we wholeheartedly agree. George T. Whitesides is the CEO of Virgin Galactic and the Spaceship Company, a manufacturer of advanced space vehicles. Prior to Virgin Galactic, George served as the Chief of Staff for NASA, and upon departure from the American Space Agency, he received the Distinguished Service Medal, the highest award the agency confers. He has testified on American space policy before the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House of Representatives, and the President's Commission on Implementation of the United States Space Exploration Policy. We couldn't be happier to have anyone but George T. Whitesides here as our keynote speaker. Please welcome George.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you tonight. I live in Lancaster, California, so it's always really exciting when I get to come down to the big city, and experience the excitement of everything that you all have to offer down here. I am the CEO of Virgin Galactic and TSC, and it's a really great pleasure to tell you a little bit about what we're doing, but not just that, tell you a little bit about the tremendous excitement that's coursing through commercial space industry. And it's so exciting because that industry is really centered on Southern California and Los Angeles in particular. And so we are at the epicenter of this incredible revolution that is changing the game for how we interact with our planet, our environment, communications, transportation, and all of it is really centered here in Southern California. And so it's a real pleasure to be speaking to you at such an exciting moment in time. Now, I think I have this. I get bored easily, so I try to present things quickly. You're a high bandwidth audience, I can tell, particularly with all these deans and people in the audience. And so I'm going to give you a quick overview of our company and the progress that it's made. But along the way, what I hope to do is to shed a little bit of insight into commercial space more broadly. And we couldn't be luckier to have the next guy who's going to speak, Steve Isakowitz, who is like the man when it comes to the entire space industry, and he'll do a much better job than I. But I have probably better videos, so I'm hoping that will carry me through. Okay, so as I said, I live in Lancaster, California, and what I thought I would do is just to start with a few pictures that show the incredible innovation that's come from Los Angeles and the LA area and Southern California, because some of you, may be aware of it all, some of you may not be aware of it all. But I love this picture. This is the X-15 program, which many of you are familiar with. This is landing at Edwards Air Force Base. You could actually see the mountains up to Tehachapi behind it, and this was an incredible plane, early days of a reusable space vehicle. In fact, our vehicle, Spaceship Two, is in many ways predicated on the success of this incredible program, which was developed and flown here in Southern California. And I can talk more about that potentially. Sea Launch, an incredible program that was based in Long Beach, and now our own sibling company, Virgin Orbit, is doing great things in Long Beach, and there are other companies joining in Long Beach. The X-37, this is an amazing picture of the world's first sort of reusable autonomous space plane. It was flown in test flight up in Mojave, and now it flies up into space autonomously for years at a time, developed by the incredible engineers at Boeing. Do we have anybody from Boeing here? I think we do. Yes, well done on the X-37. That was an incredible, incredible program. We can't tell anybody about what it actually does, but I mean, it truly is an amazing, amazing program. Birthed inside NASA and other agencies, and now operating by the United States Air Force. And of course, a great program. This is a sister company. It's not my company, but it's a sister company that actually Steve essentially founded. He's going to be modest about it, but started that and built up that company, which is in Long Beach, California, which is going to do air launch of small satellites, which is a tremendously innovative area right now, and I'm sure Steve will talk a little bit about it because the Aerospace Corporation is doing amazing things in small satellites now. But basically, you know, you can take the capabilities of things that used to take, you know, a full sort of bus-sized object or at least a truck-sized object, and you can now do that in things that are sort of, you know, college fridge-sized objects or even toaster-sized objects. And that is an incredible revolution that's going on. But it's not the focus of my talk today. What I want to talk to you today about is the future of commercial human spaceflight. And this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. Obviously, I came from NASA, but I've been with Virgin Galactic since 2010. And we've been on an amazing journey, you know, to basically revolutionize how humanity interacts with space. We want to open space to all, to democratize space so that it moves from a region that is sort of essentially the province of government employees to a time when space is really the province of us all. Anybody can go to space. That is our ultimate vision, and that anybody can utilize the amazing capabilities of space. So why don't we start just to get oriented on the subject. We have a nice video of a recent flight in California, in Southern California, and I'll talk about it after it's done.
Fire.
Welcome to the club, astronaut.
Thanks, Space. I like this club.
All right, so none of that was CGI. That was all real things happening with real people. And the woman in the back that you saw floating around was actually, she had several firsts. So she was essentially the first passenger to fly along on a true commercial spaceship designed for commercial service. And she's our chief astronaut instructor, Beth Moses. And she said it was really great. And so that's good for our business plan. It was a truly incredible experience. But what you saw there was a reusable spaceship, right? No kidding, right? I mean, Professor, you're saying what's the future is these, things that will whiz around. And what we are trying to do is eke out the initial steps towards that inspiring future that you set out, And that future starts with reusability, right? Because if we are truly going to be throwing away our spaceships, which has been the dominant paradigm for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, we're never going to expand into space in any significant way. But it's the advent of reusability, which is really literally started here and promoted and expanded in Southern California by Southern California companies, whether you talk about Boeing doing the X-37, talk about SpaceX doing the Falcon, or you talk about us doing the Spaceship Two. The concept of reusable space vehicles is going to revolutionize our access to space, because no longer will we have to put all the costs of manufacturing a vehicle into that one flight, so that we launch that vehicle and it's $100 million going off and then burning up in the atmosphere. We can divide the cost of that build by hundreds, thousands of times. And when we do that, we move closer to the goal of someday approaching airline-like operations. And that will be a true game changer for the space community, because the costs will be radically lower, and we'll be able to expand the sphere of economic opportunity into space in a way that has never been the case before. And that revolution is really being driven by California companies, and not just California companies, by Southern California, LA area companies. And that's something that we can all be really proud of. There's something in the water about technology here in Southern California. This is a great shot of the experience that we offer. We now have over 600 folks who have paid their money to fly with us, representing about $120 million of business. It's an amazing community of people. They're looking forward to flying with us, and they're going to have the absolute time of their lives. I always like to ask the question. It's always a little risky, but if cost and safety were no issue, how many people would like to go to space? Yeah, fantastic. They promised me that this audience would be enthusiastic. So there's Beth flying around. So this was an important flight that we did, where we demonstrated the full mission opportunity, all the way from takeoff to landing with somebody in the back. She got out of her seat, she floated around the cabin, and it was really just a fantastic experience. So that was a big moment for us. We had another big moment recently, and I'm going to talk over this video a little bit, where we unveiled our first space suits, or our flight suits, basically, and we partnered with Under Armour to do that. And this is sort of trying to bring a little bit of the sexy back into the space industry, right? And I wouldn't normally refer to anything related to myself as sexy, but this is really amazing. So let's roll this video. So we used all of Under Armour's latest technologies in clothing and apparel, and then we came to Baltimore to unveil this thing, and then we went to New York, and we had to do it special. So we had a weightless fashion show, which you'll see in a second. There's my boss. And, these actually aren't the suits yet. These are just the undergarments. Yeah, so that's cool. And yeah, we rented one of those, indoor skydiving things, and then we brought in these amazing dancers. And, it's all part of trying to bring style and art and music and culture into space, which is what is happening now. It's no longer the province of government. Another important milestone for our company was we went public last fall on the New York Stock Exchange. This was the front of the New York Stock Exchange, typically understated for Virgin Group, and we're now we had a little tussle to get the ticker SPACE, right, SPCE, but NASDAQ was friendly enough to give it over to us. And I don't think we need to spend too much time on this, but this was, you can click the button there. There we go. Anyway, we went public, and what's important about that, I think you need to press a button. What's important about that is the access to capital that comes along with that, right? I mean, there are actually not that many companies, pure play space companies, that are in the public markets, and I think that this is just a sign of things to come, right? You know, many of these companies are privately held, very exciting. They're getting, you know, private equity money, VC money. But just like the internet, what's going to start happening, I think, is these companies are going to start becoming public, and that money that comes out of it, assuming successful outcomes, will then spread through the ecosystem just as it did in the internet. And I think, you know, in a good case, we're really at the dawn of this era of space commercialization, which flows out with manifold innovative impacts to the Southern California economy. I want to move off the stage in a little bit, but I just wanted to show a couple last things. This is a little bit of footage, and I think you can click on it, and I'll talk over it, of our next spaceship, because our aspiration is to build 5 spaceships over the course of the coming years, or 4 spaceships. We've got 1 already, or over the course of the coming years. And this is important because I don't know if you can press play, but this is important because we need a fleet to sort of
behind me is our second spaceship
to do things.
That we are assembling for Virgin Galactic. This will be the second spaceship that will go into service after VSS Unity.
Yeah.
As you can see, the vehicle starting to look like a spaceship. We're very far along in the assembly of this vehicle. We've built more than 90% of the composite structure of this vehicle. We've completed the wing, we've completed the fuselage. The feather has just completed its initial installation on the wing. And so it's an incredibly exciting time for the team, because for the first time, you look out on our shop floor here in Faith and you see a fleet of spaceships. Weight on Wheels is an important milestone because it gets us closer to having an operational fleet of spaceships. This is a critical milestone in the build of any airplane or any spaceship because it signifies major structural assembly is complete. It allows us to tie together all the systems across the vehicle, to move the vehicle around the hangar for the first time, and start to prepare the vehicle for its ground testing program.
Okay, so the reason why that's important is that in order to build that vehicle, we had to build an organization that could build that vehicle, and these are the people who built it. So we now have over 700 employees in the Southern California area, and that is a wide group of people. We have engineers, we have manufacturing technicians, we have support staff, and we built that from scratch. And we built it in a vertically integrated way because that was the way that we could move fastest. And I think that that's what you're seeing throughout the aerospace industry now. People are taking tools that are from different parts of the economy, whether it's 3D manufacturing or it's other kinds of tools, to create a system that they can do themselves and build that very quickly. And so that's what we're doing here. Okay. Final points just on workforce. This is one of my favorite pictures here. There's something called the Aerospace Games every year. Has anybody ever been to the Aerospace Games? Okay, fantastic. So the Aerospace Games is when the workforce of Southern California's aerospace industry comes together to play beach volleyball and other aerospace games against each other. Watermelon eating. Steve's a very competitive guy, and so we've gone head-to-head with the Aerospace Corporation a few times. But what's exciting to me is you can see the individual tribes here, but really we're one tribe, right? We are, and can be very proud of, an incredible group of aerospace leaders, and there is this concentration of talent in Southern California. I can't imagine, anywhere else to be building some of this stuff. And these are people who, they do move between companies, but they are a national asset that we've got here. And, thanks to your efforts, you're adding more people to this group, right? They're going to be connected into this ecosystem where they're going to learn how to build things. They're going to learn how to engineer. They're going to learn how to build the vehicles of the future. And I think we've got a great dynamic going here in Southern California. We just need to not screw it up, keep that dynamic flywheel going together, and I think LAEDC is a key part of that. We try to support it with something called Galactic Unite, where we do grants from both the company and our customer community. We've given over $200,000 to local organizations in the Southern California area, or the California area, $200,000 to local organizations, and we've done over 163 outreach events reaching 25,000 young people, my people tell me. So that's exciting. We have to do that because we have to inspire people about what they can build. And I think that goes from elementary school kids up to junior high to high school. Particularly very important to keep people in the engineering pipeline. We get a lot of people who go in, but they don't stay through 4 or 5 years. Got to keep those people in there because once they come out on the other side, we need them. We need them bad, and we got to keep them in that pipeline. So really exciting times. I think that's everything that I have to say. Thank you so much. I look forward to the conversation today. Thanks.
Previously, he served as president and chief technology officer of Virgin's space venture businesses. Prior to these roles, he held the title of deputy associate administrator for the Exploration Systems Mission Directorate at NASA. Please welcome our featured speaker this evening, the president and CEO of the Aerospace Corporation, Steve Isakowitz.
Thank you, Bill. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I think it's good. So there's certain things in life you hate to have happen. One of them is following George Whitesides on a talk. My old boss, incredible enthusiasm, it's hard to match, and yes, his videos crush. But I'll share one quick story. So I did work for George, and when I announced to the Virgin team I'm going to be leaving Virgin to go work at Aerospace Corporation, a lot of the staff came back to me because they went to the aerospace games. I didn't actually know anything about the aerospace games at the time. And they said, we just crushed the Aerospace Corporation. And they spent the next month just sort of teasing me over and over. So finally, when I went to the Aerospace Corporation, I said, all right, my first goal, beat Virgin. So I think we have a couple aerospace folks here. They will notice that a lot of the aerospace summer interns that we recruited that summer were a lot taller and bigger than your average engineer. And I think actually we did EQ out that first year, so it was a friendly competition. So first I want to thank Bill Allen for the invitation to be here and Dr. Thomas Parham for sponsoring this event. I think it's terrific that we're doing this. I think LA is clearly the epicenter for aerospace. It always has been. It's clearly become a much more competitive setting as we go forward. Just today, I was meeting with the FAA director for space transportation, and I was sharing to him when I worked at Virgin that one of the big decisions we had to make at the time working with George was, as we stood up this Virgin Orbit company, we were thinking, should we locate it here in Los Angeles? And frankly, a lot of companies are saying, no, let's go to Texas, let's go to Florida, let's go to other places. At the end of the day, we decided we wanted to be here. Why? Because it truly is the epicenter for aerospace. It has the talent base. It has a lot of the capability. You're in the city. You could just drive up a little north. You'd be there in Mojave. It's pretty unique to be able to have all your engineers and your test facilities so nearby. So from that center, it sort of drove it to be here. Well, what I want to talk to you about is the bigger picture in terms of what's happening across the entire space domain. In fact, I'm sure a number of you are thinking, Steve, how could you be so stupid as to leave Virgin to go work for another company? Look at all the cool stuff that's going on. But I'll tell you why I decided that it was a good time to leave. I would argue in America's space program, this is the most exciting time in terms of what's happening in space. And let's just sort of take a quick survey across the three sectors. There's the national security side of space, which is going to be the first half of my talk this morning. Yet there's been the stand-up at the end of December on the first military service in over 70 years since the creation of the Air Force, and that's the U.S. Space Force. Now, some people are saying, really? You need a Space Force? Well, I'm going to spend some time explaining to you why the whole national security is going through a truly generational shift in terms of what's taking place. Now, I won't spend as much time on the next two, but just I think it's important to point out, the second one is the civil sector. This is the one that NASA is very involved in. And NASA has set out an audacious goal of saying, hey, it's been 50 years since the Apollo 11 astronauts stepped on the moon. We should be back there. This time just to put footprints, but go there to stay and get onto Mars. So NASA has set forth a very audacious goal in the next handful of years to try to get astronauts on the surface of the moon. But this time they realize They can't do it the old-fashioned way, which is president handing them a blank check and Congress approving it in terms of what it takes. So it's required a whole new paradigm, a whole new way of thinking of what needs to be done. Now, whether it's national security or it's the civil sector, both of them realize that the game-changing element that's going on is in the commercial sector, whether it's Virgin or other incredible companies that are standing up, and that it's going to require a level of partnership that's going to be at a level that's never before seen. So, let me tell you what, I want to show you a couple of what I think are iconic moments in the last year and a half that sort of shows why these are the most interesting of times. Let's hope the video works. There we go. I love the rumble of rockets. Okay. On your left shows you the threatening world that we live in. North Korea has shown the world, and much of the world is showing the ability to build their own rockets. In fact, one of the things I found completely audacious when I went to Virgin is, I think it was my first day in the job, George said, hey, we had to build a small launch vehicle. And I'm thinking to myself, this is crazy. I mean, it's just to think that usually it takes nations, it takes NASA, it takes the US or the Russians or the European community to build a rocket to go to space. And here we have someone like Richard Branson says, build a rocket. Now, we live in a time you can do that. We live in a time where you can get some smart entrepreneurs, really even student level, a few years of experience, and actually build your own rockets. Well, if we could do that here, what prevents it from happening in North Korea? That's the scary thing that's going on right now. Other nations are developing the ability, so whether it's a rocket that can take a satellite to space, it's the same technology that allows you to take, fire off missiles. So when the North Korea launches what they launch, we don't know if it's for putting things in space or coming at us. The other video on the right, it's too bad it's off the screen now, but it was another iconic moment that occurred a little over a year and a half ago. And that was the moment that SpaceX sort of changed the paradigm of how we want to do things in space and show that we don't have to throw away everything we put up there, that we could actually start bringing back these boosters. And that video that was showing was 2 boosters coming back back there in Florida. And for many people who saw the moment, I don't know, man, just raise a hand how many of you saw it in the news or otherwise. Yeah, it was really a moment that really was a kind of a wake up to everybody. Because there were so many people before that moment that said, it's not really practical, it can't be done, you're not going to be able to bring it back. So not only did it work, but you saw the beauty of 2 boosters coming back, and that really did look like CGI when that was being done. So what are the kind of threats we're looking at? So let's just look at just the last few weeks and months in terms of what's going on. So you have Putin announcing that Russia is developing these super weapons. No longer are we going to be firing the kinds of missiles that go and are bright and are easy for satellites to see. We're going to be developing the kind of weapons that fly at really high speeds, at low altitude. They're really dim. They're hard to see. Upend the balance in terms of all the treaties that are taking place. We have had satellites that when North Korea would launch, we'd be able to inform the president saying, it's not coming at us, it's a test. So we don't have to overreact. Now think about it. When a rocket launches, you need to know pretty quickly, is it a threat to Los Angeles or is it just a test? Our satellites are capable of doing it. The Russians are looking for new capabilities that make it too hard for conventional satellites to see it. Just in the last week or so, with regards to what's happening with the Iranians, when the Iranians launched their missiles at air bases where US soldiers, the reason why we were able to avoid a lot of fatality is we knew what was about to come. And again, there's no mystery in the fact that it's based upon the satellite technology that's able to see those things happening that made it possible. It was satellite technology that allowed us to determine pretty quickly that when a Ukrainian airline went down, it wasn't because of some faulty problem that was first claimed. It was because of some hostile action that took place. And even India, which is an ally of us, has shown what more and more countries are trying to do. They had launched, a little over a year ago, they launched a missile that blew up a satellite in space. Now that is a wake-up call. In fact, the Chinese did it about 10 years ago. We have the most powerful military in the world because we could go globally anywhere we want, whether it's through GPS, our strategic communications, our missile warning capability, our weather satellites, and space has been treated as sort of a sanctuary. We could safely put these satellites up and people won't touch them. Well, that changed about 10 years ago when China blew up one of its own satellites, and India has followed up to show that they blew up one of their own satellites too to show it can be done. That was like a wake-up call. We no longer can assume that we can operate from space and assume that we're untouched. Now, it's not just for military, it's for our economy. Now, you take GPS as an example. GPS touches everything we do in our economy. It does everything on your iPhone. Can you imagine a day without GPS and your kids are on the road? They wouldn't know how to get home. I'm not sure I would even know how to get home. We've become so used to being able to use that for a lot of what we have in terms of navigation, our economy, the financial transactions that take place. It is a credible part of the world that we live in. This next one here is just to show how the usage of space has grown massively over time. If this video hopefully shows clearly, we're going to show from the beginning of the space program in 1957 to bring it up 60 years to show how many objects have been put in space, either for satellites that are still operating or the debris that we leave up in space. So you can see in the early years, we had a few satellites in different places around the Earth. But as you can see, quickly over time, it has started to really populate. Now, just to be clear, the objects in space are not that big, but it should give you the sense of how much activity is going on in space. And this has just been in the last 60 years. In fact, we track these things that are going on in space because there is so many things going on in space. Now, the interesting thing of where we are today, that LA is not the only place that has traffic jams. Believe it or not, we're getting to a place in America's space program and in the world space program where space itself is becoming really crowded. There are times when actually satellites have to dodge each other or debris that's coming near each other. Now, right now, it's not a big threat, but as we go forward, there's a couple things to think about. You know, as adversaries try to maybe blow up satellites, that's like the worst polluting event that could happen in space, because unlike blowing up something in the sky where gravity self-cleans and brings everything down, in space, it stays up there. Now, the exciting thing is on the commercial side, there's a lot of companies that want to put these satellites, particularly near the Earth, really game-changing technologies, things that are going to bring the internet to the other 3 billion of those around the world that have no access to the internet. Super exciting stuff. But when they talk about it, they're talking about putting up not 10, 50, 100, 500 satellites. They're talking about putting 1,000 satellites, 5,000. Even potentially tens of thousands of satellites are the kinds of numbers that have been bantered around. Now, just to put these numbers in perspective, right now, we have 2,000 satellites worldwide that are operating in space. So probably in the next, I don't know, maybe handful of years, we will put more new satellites in space than we have during the entire world's space program. That should give you a sense of the vibrancy that's taking place. So with all these things taking place, with space becoming congested, contested, and much more competitive, it drove Congress about 3 years ago to say, we need to change the paradigm. We need to take space much more seriously than we have. Space up to now had been primarily the province of working within the Air Force, but it needed to be heightened as a critical part of our ability to have global capability. So as a result, after 3 years of debate, passed into law on December 20th, signed by the president, was the creation of the US Space Force. So now we have this new service that over the next year and a half is going to define exactly what it looks like. Now, I think that has big implications for Los Angeles, because Los Angeles, through the Space and Missile Systems Center, just around the corner here, is the entity responsible for the acquisition of all the things that we see in space. Clearly, SMC is going to have a big role in terms of what it looks like, in terms of what goes forward. And so I would urge you to pay attention to what's happening on that front. There's a lot of discussion in terms of its implications. There's a lot of interest where to base all these different new entities. For example, they just stood up a US Space Command. This is the organization that operates the satellites. And should we get into a warfighting mode where we actually have to fight from space, they'd be the ones in charge of it. A lot of it's happening in Colorado Springs. But there's a lot of discussion where to locate these things. So states like California, Colorado, Florida, Alabama, Texas have a strong interest, and they're vying right now for a lot of the location of a lot of these critical skills. Now, let me shift and spend the last few minutes of my talk talking about what is happening with regards to the commercial side, and what is the role that we're playing here at aerospace and working with other companies. This is a really busy chart, and what it's really meant to convey is we're starting to create, I believe, in the Southern California area, the kind of Silicon Valley effect that we'd see in our neighbors up north. There are a lot of government agencies, if you look at the top right part of the charts, everything from the Space and Missile Systems Center to DIU in San Francisco to In-Q-Tel as part of the intelligence community to DARPA, different organizations that are trying to more and more partner with commercial entities. In the middle, you have like Cross Campus highlighted here and Catalyst Campus in Colorado. You have places that are incubating these kinds of technologies, these kind of companies that are showing up with new ideas. We have organizations like Starburst and Techstars. These are accelerators. Hey, Van, there you go. That bring together these companies and highlight them in a way that brings greater attention and hopefully future funding and viability. We have events like the Air Force Pitch Day on the left side, which I'll speak to in a moment. Then we have the plethora of all the different companies at different stages that need all sorts of different support, whether it's working on testing their ideas, finding partnerships through collaboration, working with some of the bigger companies to collaborate to make them viable, and to identify those companies earlier on and help them make the connections, whether it's in the government or with regards to technology. And I think really important, and why I'm glad Cal State is here, I think a lot of the fuel for this is fed by the universities. It's by the students that are critical for bringing in and enabling a lot of these ideas, a lot of the creativity in tomorrow's workforce. Let me talk about the Air Force Pitch Day just as an example of the kind of cool things that are going on. The Air Force, led by SMC, had an event in San Francisco where they had companies come in and pitch on a business plan. Instead of taking 9, 12 months to get funding, they had something where they essentially came in and had sort of a Shark Tank event where companies came in, pitched their ideas, started with 60 companies. At the end of the day, about 30 companies each got an award of about $750,000 on the spot, based upon their business plan. In fact, what was cool about it is after they were rewarded, there was a government credit card. They would go and swipe the credit card, and instantly there was I think it was $100,000 that were put into their bank account just to get them going. And those same companies have an opportunity to double that to $1.5 million up to $3 million to get things going. That's an example of the kinds of things the government's trying to do to really jumpstart a lot of these commercial companies. Now, more local here, aerospace and other FFRDCs, and again, FFRDC is a nonprofit that works very closely with the government, that more and more we're finding our dependency on the commercial sector. So we've helped working with JPL and the RAND Corporation to create this sort of a Space Ventures Coalition where we're working with these kinds of companies to allow them to work with us, to identify them, and to bring them into the government sector in terms of opportunities. And one of the big things we've been doing is working with accelerators. So like Starburst I was talking about a moment ago. So we've done things where we've brought startups to the campus. We've brought people in from the Defense Department and the intelligence community, a chance to see some of these companies. Some of them truly will be game-changing. The technologies out there, as I tell everybody, I don't know which companies will survive and which ones will fade away, but I know the thing that will not change, that's inexorable, and that's the technology. The technology we are now seeing, we are living in an amazing age of technological acceleration, whether it's artificial intelligence, 3D manufacturing, cloud computing, cyber activity that's going on. The way we build satellites and the way we will fly things in the future will be so very different. I mean, George said it right. When I was at MIT, I remember thinking, I want to do a startup. And I remember sitting down, seriously trying to come up with a business plan. And I quickly realized that if I could just raise $300 million, I could start up a company. Yeah, I know, you laugh. So exactly, that's not viable. Today, the paradigm is completely shifted. We have kids in college who can go raise a few $100,000, $1 million, build one of these small CubeSats, hitch it on a ride on a big rocket, put it in space, demonstrate some basic capabilities, and next thing you know, they're getting Series A and followed by Series B funding. That is super exciting. We are truly, I believe, in a golden age of innovation in the space sector. And I think we're really fortunate to be here in Los Angeles to do it. My final chart is something that we have done working with an organization called TechCrunch. TechCrunch is the biggest organization in Silicon Valley that brings together all sorts of startups. They have a big event. They have a number of them up in Silicon Valley. Their big event's called the TechCrunch Disrupt, where they brought in, I don't think they had 10,000 people. They had like 400 media coverage in terms of what's going out there. Anyways, they're the entity to bring those things together. They saw what was happening in the different technology sectors, and the one that they realized that they need to start paying attention to is the space sector. So they came to the Aerospace Corporation, and they said, we'd like to partner with you to try to come up with a way of how we could begin to take advantage. So we helped to convince them to come to Los Angeles on June 25th. That we're going to be hosting just nearby here by LAX, where we're going to bring in for a full day. They're expecting about 1,000 people and another tens of thousands of people that will be following it remotely, to talk about the kind of ecosystem, startup, new ideas that are out there, and where this sector is going and where the technology is taking us. Final word I'd like to say, since we started off talking about Cal State University, is this is a great place to be. You know, whether it's UCLA or USC or the Cal State schools, we are in a time where the battle for talent is at an unprecedented level. The economy is hot, unemployment super low, engineers are especially in demand, software engineers, cyber engineers, the competition for that talent is fierce. I think it requires all of us, and I think it's one of the biggest challenges we have to remain competitive. How do we stoke the pipeline to make sure that tomorrow's workforce is U.S. citizens that have come up through the system, have gone to these companies, have brought forward these ideals, that place it here in the U.S. that enable the growth. And not just the traditional faces, but represent the kind of diversity of who we are, whether it's gender, whether it's people of color, whether it's where you've grown up. I personally have seen that the best innovation takes place when you have different people with different perspectives coming together. I think LA is very rich from that standpoint. And I think it's something that we can build as a further foundation to see more and more that this becomes truly the epicenter for the space universe. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Wasn't that terrific? Our panel's going to have a tough time topping these two, but I know they're up to it. We have a terrific panel of experts who are now going to have a conversation about what you've heard and more about what's going on in this extraordinarily fascinating field. And I so appreciate Steve's comments about next generation talent for these industries and the partnerships with our educational institutions that will generate that talent for us. Linda Huber is an intellectual property partner in the Los Angeles office of Nixon Peabody. She has special connection to the space commercialization field as she has family working in the industry. As an attorney, she leverages her background and patent experience to represent various clients in the medical fields, academic institutions, private foundations, and pharmaceutical companies. She's going to introduce the panel of experts to you and moderate a conversation, and there'll be time for some Q&A that we hope you'll all participate in. So let's bring up Linda Huber to introduce the rest of our expert panelists.
Thank you, Bill. Good evening, everyone. As Bill mentioned, I am a partner here at Nixon Peabody. Nixon Peabody is an international firm. We are a full-service firm with offices in many states. I am based here in LA. I am a biotech patent attorney, and you may think that what does biotech patents have to do with space commercialization? The answer is very little. I married into this industry. And so we have so many friends in working as engineers in this industry that are still in LA, and some who have left because some of the workforce had to leave LA. And so I've been keeping tabs on what's going on, and this is near and dear to my heart. So I'm very interested and very excited to moderate this panel this evening. And so I would like to welcome up on the stage Paul Russell from L3 Harris, Van Espadodi from Starburst Accelerator, Mark Davidson from JPL, and I'd also like to invite back George and Steve to join the panel as well. And Paul, Van, and Mark, if you wouldn't mind giving a very short introduction to yourself.
Got it? There we go. Hi, I'm Paul Russell. I'm currently with L3 Harris. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of the Electron Dynamics Division, or Electron Devices Division now. Formerly was started by Hughes Medical Foundation back in the 50s to provide high energy amplifiers for space applications, radar applications. Prior to that, though, I do come from a space background. I worked for Space Systems Loral. I actually built satellites for about 20 years before I moved up into management, and now they no longer let me touch them. But very, near and dear to my heart. My family came from a space background. My dad, actually, one of the really nice things my wife did was she took some of my dad's notes from the Apollo program and put them on a chalkboard background. And you go back and look at where down here we started with slide rules and a bunch of guys and gals, and put a man on a moon, 50 years ago. Just a fantastic history and legacy. So we should all be very proud of where we've come from.
Thank you, Paul.
Hi, everyone. My name is Van Espabodi. Thanks for pronouncing that correctly. I am the co-founder of Starburst Accelerator. Welcome to our home. This is actually quite cathartic for me. When we first started our business, almost 6-7 years ago, and we came to LA, everyone said, you need to talk to LA EDC. And we said, okay, and then what? And then they said, you need to speak to the city of El Segundo, and kindly enough, one of the biggest real estate developers was extremely philanthropic and basically helping us build this entire project of what is this cross-campus Starburst, including Aerospace Corp and many others. Virgin has their government contracts launch division upstairs. So this is really meant to be that hub, and we will see more iterations of this. I just want to say all the things you've been hearing from Steve and George is not just gospel. I think it's just a sign of the times that there's that many more companies and how real the economics of this is, and that this change is extremely real, and it's a privilege to have you here. My background, 18 years in aerospace and defense, started in the government, quickly realized that was a mistake as a Hill staffer, then joined the private sector, working for Raytheon, did a lot of our work overseas in questionable parts of the world, and eventually the British government privatized their airspace, and I spent 8 years there doing technology transfer back into the US with the FAA, NASA, and the Air Force. All these different experiences gave me the one conclusion that true change makers are the entrepreneurs of our generation, and it's no longer just about an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos, that there are thousands of that many more talented, incredible individuals with money coming from unexpected places that are changing this entire economic mindset. So I'm happy to talk more about that later, but thank you for having me. Yeah.
Good evening, Mark Davidson, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, La Cañada Flintridge. Our mailing address is in Pasadena. I'm the Center Technology Transfer Lead for the Small Business Innovative Research Program at JPL. And I also work in an Earth Science program, a NASA program office known as the Western Water Applications Office. So several different hats. JPL, of course, is the other FFRDC in Los Angeles County. We are a NASA center. We are operated by the California Institute of Technology on behalf of NASA. Started as the Rocket Club back in 1936. We blew up a building on campus. Dr. Von Karman had the club move off campus, hence the location for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory today. We all know the history and the context of the missions, et cetera. As we speak, our folks are working in the high bay at the Space Flight Assembly Facility, buttoning up Mars 2020. It'll be boxed and shipped to the Cape, and our launch window is July 17th through August 5th. Target landing date, February 18th of next year, 2021. So maybe tune into a TV and see another rover on the surface of Mars. Brought to you by NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So a wide variety of missions, as I mentioned, that we participate in and focus on, both in solar system exploration for extant life and out beyond the solar system to other galaxies, et cetera, identifying potential other planets for visits many, many centuries from now, possibly. And then also Earth science missions, monitoring the Earth's environment, et cetera. We do a lot of partnering with academic institutions, so it is great to see Cal State Dominguez here today and MSI, which we want to reach out to and have participation with through our STTR program going forward. Having mentioned that, NASA just released its program year 2020 SBIR solicitation. Please go to sbir.nasa.gov and you can view the solicitation. If you're a small business or an academic institution partnered with a small business, we encourage you to review that solicitation and to participate in it. Personally, I'm an aerospace refugee, having worked for Northrop Grumman Corporation. I was in their corporate development organization doing mergers, acquisitions, divestitures. They moved. I didn't because I had previously lived and worked in Washington, D.C. as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy back in the late 1990s. So I didn't want to revisit Washington, D.C. again. So prior to that, naval officer and driving ships. So kind of a Brownian motion to get to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, but let me tell you, it's a great location. Our lab director, Mike Watkins, and the other 5,000 engineers and scientists there really enjoy doing the work, and we thank you for your support.
Thank you, Mark. So I wanted to keep the first question very broad to our panelists here. Basically, what do you see in the future for innovative technologies in space? How about Paul?
Back on. I think that this commercialization. I mean, you look at how different Virgin Galactic's vehicle looks than the space shuttle. I mean, you can clearly see the lineage through the lifting bodies, but you talk about the evolution of materials and 3D manufacturing, and all of those things are absolutely opening up a completely different landscape for technology and potential applications out there. Just where I am, we're talking about power densities of amplifiers that we couldn't even imagine 20 years ago. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, just the ability to design things with computers, and the spillover from Moore's Law into engineering has been just fantastic. And I think that there's just so many new applications and technologies available to us, and it's only what these guys have all said, we're just at the inflection point of seeing what's going to happen out there.
Yes.
Okay. Look, we get pitched startup ideas every day. My team identifies almost 2,000 companies at a seed stage. That's 5 guys in a garage to almost 10 people that are raising hundreds of thousands to productize. Just down the street, you have Relativity Space. I was there earlier today to completely flip the risk model on manufacturing on its head. What do I get excited about? I mean, this industry represents innovation at its best. I mean, forever. The heritage here has always been dominated, and I think what's changing is the subsystems and some of the mission opportunities are being championed by non-traditional non-governmental entities to help catalyze or at least shake up the market to allow those missions to happen faster. So I get excited about everything from hypersonics to additive manufacturing in space. Those are the things that really pique my interest.
Mark, do you see things coming out of sort of the spin-out startups, companies that you're funding?
Oh, absolutely. As Van mentioned, in not only hypersonics, but propulsion for small satellites. Typically, small satellites, the first one came from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo about 15 years ago, built in a garage. You didn't need a high bay, you didn't need folks in clean suits, et cetera. It was a group of aerospace engineers at Cal Poly put this thing together on campus. Got a lift and went up, and I think it's saying the Cal Poly fight song or something, kind of like Sputnik back in '57. But that's revolutionized what's happening with the ability to put greatly reduced from a size and weight and also power consumption standpoint sensor systems, etc., into very small packages. Stuff that when I was a youngster, I grew up at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and the lift that they used to do on a Titan 3B would shake your knees from 10 miles away, but there was an exquisite large bus on top of that vehicle. And it goes up into GEO, and it's got 99.9% accuracy, and it's still up there today, probably. Whereas these small sats, you can throw them up through whatever lift capacity you can find in the marketplace, and it's designed and developed to burn up within 3 years. And as you mentioned, Steve, they're going to put up tens of thousands of these doggone things for World Wide Web coverage, et cetera. So that's a real game changer. I think probably one of the best examples I can give, one of the companies that we funded through the NASA SBIR program was a stage funding beyond the traditional SBIR. It's not a California company. It's TechShot. They're located in Texas outside the Johnson Space Flight Center. They are putting into place an additive manufacturing bio, so this is something that there's a union for bio and space. They're putting an additive manufacturing device on the International Space Station, and they are going to start printing human tissues with the eventual goal of printing human organs in space. You do that in a terrestrial environment with gravity, the capillaries are crushed. The integrity of the organ is not there. You do it in a near zero G environment, you can actually grow that organ in space. So hypothetically someday you need a new heart, place an order. Maybe Amazon will deliver it to you.
Steve, can you share to us any non-classified glimpse of what's in the future?
Yeah, there's so many exciting technologies that are out there. So we talked about thousands of satellites, microminiaturizations, sensors, optical communications. We're getting to a point where I would call potentially the singularity of space, where virtually we're going to find a future world where you could sit there with your iPhone and look at anywhere in the world, any time of the day, to find something that you're looking for. And I think one of the enabling technologies, and I think it's going to be interesting to watch out, is artificial intelligence. So today we launch very stupid satellites that go and they just take pictures of everything. Huge amounts of data that are going through. But in the future, we're going to have satellites that are going to be almost sentient satellites. They're going to be self-aware of their own health, if things break, what needs to be fixed, if something hostile is coming, if it was natural. Instead of mapping the entire ocean, they'll be looking for the boat, and they'll know by identification what it is that they're looking for. And they'll be able to talk to satellites next to them. So if they break down, they'll tell the neighboring satellite, hey, you come in and replace what I'm doing while I undergo repairs. And I think a lot of that is by these very advanced technologies. It's no longer science fiction, but science fact in the next 10 years.
How about you, George? We've heard where your company is and have done great achievements. What's next?
Well, one of the things that's really exciting to me is high-speed travel. The sort of the other side of the coin from Steve's, Russian hypersonic missile or whatever that thing is the idea of supersonic or even hypersonic travel. We've been going at Mach 0.8 or 0.9 since the retirement of the Concorde, and I think there's a great opportunity now to break out of that. Someone recently told me that, if you look back, I guess cantering on, or maybe going along on a horse is about 10 times slower than going on a steam train. And then going in a jet airplane is about 10 times slower than going on the early days of a steam train. 10 times faster. Did I say that right? You get the idea. And then a hypersonic vehicle would be about 10 times, order of magnitude, faster than a jet plane. And we're at the front edge of that possibility. And what's exciting to us as a company is we're going to be the only company flying hundreds and eventually thousands of people on high-speed Mach 3 journeys on a winged vehicle, which we think are important to that future. And so we're really excited to dig into that. And I think it's potentially in 10 or 20 or whatever years it is, that our kids will look back and say, you actually stayed on a plane for 10 hours or 15 hours, that's crazy, Dad. So we're excited about that future.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up on that?
Of course.
I think we're all very technical industry people, and sometimes it's hard to translate the things we get excited about that could affect your everyday lives. And I think it's really important that you all may not realize that everything that goes as simple as making your blue dot work on your phone that starts to stratify so many other capabilities. How will Hulu work on your phone in Africa remotely in just a matter of, these things like this, things we haven't even imagined. How will banking work? How will transactions happen? How does communications? How do you get from one place to another where you don't need lie flat bed seats on your plane? These are concepts we're just starting to realize. Things that we've become used to will be laughable in just a few years' time. And I just wanted to remind everyone that all these innovations in the space sector are allowing your everyday lives to become that much more exponentially easier.
Thank you. So Steve, you talked about the Space Force, which I'm very glad you did. And I'm curious to hear from the other panelists with sort of the advent of the Space Force. What kind of impact do you think it will have on the space industry here in LA? How about we start with Mark?
Well, as I mentioned in my introductory comments, I actually worked in the Pentagon for a few years, and I was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy. That had an advantage. Department of the Navy is the Navy and Marine Corps. So when I would walk into a policy meeting chaired by the Deputy Secretary of Defense or even Bill Cohen, SecDef, it was somewhat democratic in its structure. We had votes. So the Army had one vote, the Air Force had one vote, I had two, Navy and Marine Corps. Now the Department of the Air Force, I would envision, would have two votes, Air Force and Space Force. So that in and of itself, within the confines of the Pentagon, is going to be a cultural change for the services and how they scrap and work their budget requests and their priorities, et cetera. So I think that's probably the first and foremost impact that I see at a policy level within the infrastructure of the Department of Defense. Secondly, there is a need for some sort of operationalization of space from a defensive standpoint. As you mentioned, the ASAT activities by the Indians, previously by the Chinese. We did it from the USS Lake Erie years ago, shot down a satellite from a US Navy cruiser. So the capacity is there. It's a threat that is real. And there's really not within the Department of Defense, outside of the Air Force, a mindset or culture that is purely space focused. So I think there's a good rationalization for that going forward.
That makes a lot of sense. Van, do you see sort of in the startup world, the technologies coming out, are there technologies that would support what you think the Space Force may need?
Okay. When you think of how the military buys technology, you often think of the oligopoly of the big primes and a very black box of industry that we don't understand how it works. The commercial sector in automotive, in processing, in biotech has changed the cycle of how faster capabilities come into the market. And startups and entrepreneurs in particular are designed economically to accomplish that kind of new technological iterative progress that is not congruent with how the military normally buys things. And they get that. And Space Force in particular appreciates that how fast it needs to move in order to keep up with the threat of allowing your everyday lives to be sustainable needs to address that sort of a entrepreneurial community or market segment in order to help them keep up with the threat. So I am a big believer that the industrial supply chain that has traditionally supported the military will dramatically change
Paul, what about like communications and satellites? I mean, that seems, Steve alluded to that's sort of what one of the aspects of the Space Force would need is the satellites giving us the information and being able to track what's going on. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things that we've seen from one of our customers is, used to be the way satellites were designed, they were all custom designed. Even commercial satellites, took about 2 years. And I worked really hard when I was in that industry because when I started, from the day the contract was awarded to the time it launched was about 5 years. We've managed to get that down to 2 once the direct broadcast providers came into play, and there was this intense competition. Sirius Radio actually designed the first Sirius Radio constellation. And, when those new emerging things came out, they put intense pressure on the organizations to respond more quickly. But what we're seeing now is there's a complete shift with the small satellites that are coming into play, and even some of the mid-sized satellites actually are designed with payloads that are completely mission agnostic. And so they can launch the satellite and command the antenna pattern to where it services, CONUS, and with the advent of electric propulsion, because I started, when I started, half the weight of the spacecraft was the propellant used to circularize the orbit. So half what the launch vehicle was carrying into space didn't even generate revenue. It just enabled generation of revenue. Now with electric propulsion, they have the ability to move satellites all over the geostationary arc. And so you could have a satellite that was designed to cover CONUS one day, and 6 months later it could be serving a European market just by reconfiguring the payload. Now imagine you're a military, you have a conflict that develops regionally, you can move an asset over there and get coverage almost instantaneously. And so it really enables this flexible warfighting that the military is learning that they're going to have to deal with. Because we live in a much more dangerous world today than we did when I came in. When I came in, 35 years ago, we were just dealing with one really nation-state, threat. Today, you've got 2 really big nation-state threats, some emerging bad actors, in the world, plus you've got non-nation-state, terrorism. And so all of that means you've got to have a military force that's very flexible and that can respond, to a regional conflict, but also be ready to respond if there's something that's a more strategic conflict. So again, a long way of saying, I think that, the Space Force is going to enable a lot of things, and really demand a lot of new technology from the aerospace organizations.
Thank you. George, I know you're from more commercial, but with your background in NASA and everything, what are your thoughts on the Space Force and how we could bring the workforce to LA or keep some workforce in LA?
Well, Steve's really the expert on this subject, but I do know that the leader of the Space Force, General Raymond, is a really amazing guy, and I think, and we also have General Hyten on the Joint Chiefs, and so we have some great leadership, and I think that they, I'm sure, see the innovation that's present in the LA area, and I'm sure that they'll be eager to take advantage of that as they go forward.
Thank you. Steve, do you have any further thoughts than what you had shared?
I mean, I think I hit the major points, but I guess the only thing I would add is, many times when we think of the other services, they tend to be very people-intensive services. The thing that's going to make the Space Force very different is going to be a technology-intensive service. And so, therefore, there's going to be a lot of innovative thinking in terms of potentially how we get officers, how people are promoted. They're looking at new models and better ways to integrate industry on it. I mean, who knows? It could be a Gwen Shotwell who could be running the Space Force someday. I mean, that's the kind of things that people will start to think about as we think about how to partner, how to take better advantage of the technologies that are out there. And I guess one last thing, having heard George's presentation, I'm actually thinking Virgin should get the uniform contract for the Space Force. Just a thought.
Sounds good. So I wanted to move to sort of the startup and world here, since we have two excellent speakers there. What technologies are you seeing that are perhaps disruptive technologies that are coming out of the startup world that is worthy of funding, that you are funding?
Okay. I don't want you to think about propulsion systems and laser optical communications. I think what we get really excited about is what I call enabling capabilities, and Steve referred to it earlier with when he mentioned AI. The same way Netflix makes movie recommendations based on what you watched, there is incredible infrastructure that needs efficiency and needs to automatically decide how to optimize those communications. So I tend to get really excited about things that you would normally see as enabling in other sectors. And so the most popular ones are anything to do with kind of empowering more machine learning. We're seeing quantum, obviously, as an emerging theme. But what we tend to think is the new bottleneck is no longer launch and propulsion. It tends to be the ground segment. How do you get that data, all these assets that are going up in space that are allowing these communications to happen? How do you optimize that downlink, and how can AI and sensors and other IoT type enabling capabilities and even energy management allow for this processing to become more efficient? So that's really what I tend to get excited about.
What about on the flip side, sort of the larger companies? Like, what technologies are you interested in acquiring? And are these technologies here in LA?
Yeah, so I think that, obviously, in our area where we're building more hardware-centric things, the thing that's most exciting to us is additive manufacturing. And I think the ability to use different materials is really interesting to us, because that, when I worked for a solar startup about 10 years ago, we were able to design a prototype product and within 24 hours build a case for it and have it up on the roof. And the case was all built with additive manufacturing, and it sort of opened my eyes. I'm like, wow, you can do anything with this. But at the time it was limited to certain kinds of plastics. But today, now we're talking about biotech applications for additive manufacturing. So from my standpoint, the thing that really gets me excited is additive manufacturing and the ability to really turn manufacturing upside down. Because you think about it, today, a lot of our products spend 3 weeks on the water coming from across the world. In a few years, that won't matter anymore, because if you want it, you'll just print it. And I think that is an incredibly powerful, cool thing.
Absolutely. And I was told that the audience tonight is very concentrated in aerospace, which is natural. So I was wondering if there are questions from the audience that you'd like to ask this panel, so it's not just me asking a bunch of questions.
Everybody's here because they're interested in this stuff, obviously, right? I grew up as a little nerd guy in the 1960s watching the rock. Oh, I'm sorry. I grew up as a little nerd guy in the 1960s watching the first rockets take off, and that picture where they two came down, I thought I would never see that in my life. It's still very emotional, not let alone two of them simultaneously. Excuse me, it's a very emotional thing for me. But to get that inspiration, there's a lot of people that are not here tonight. One thing I recommend to any of you, if you ever get the opportunity to judge at a science fair or even go to a science fair, please. It's the most rewarding experience you could possibly imagine, to feel and just good about humanity again, that there's all these kids out there. And I judged at the Intel one, the international one, and a couple of years ago. They had 1,500 kids from all over the world who won their aspects, and amazing stuff. There were 1,000 judges, and we were there for like 2.5 days when the kids set up, and they was talking to the kids and doing the judging and all that stuff. But the most, because you talked about. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. You talked about if you know engineers, send us those kids because we got jobs for them. the saddest part was that it was open during the week. So we did that during like Wednesday was a judging, and they might have had a reward. And the day after, it was still open, and some of the kids were packing up and going home, but they were there, and it was open to the public. And I went back because I couldn't see 1,500 exhibits. I wanted to see every one and read every one, and they were so amazing. But the sad part was it was basically dead. I mean, there was almost nobody there. And at the time I thought, God, I got to find out where Elon Musk is, or whoever's got a lot of money that wants these engineers. And this is what I'm imploring to you guys. Find a way to shift the schedule, whatever, have it open on the weekend, advertise on TV to the parents, take your kids here. This is the future. That needs to happen to get the people that you need to build these things. So thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, we have an open house for families, and then we have a get to know us day, and it's so oversold at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It backs up the 210 freeway, and it has been oversubscribed. But in that regard, we've got a very rich and assertive STEM outreach program. I mean, NASA's very, very much in favor of that. There is still an education budget at NASA, thanks to the legacy that people like George left behind at the agency, et cetera. And we do a great amount of work in our local communities through the 10 centers, through the STEM programs, from K all the way up to doctoral programs in working with students, bringing them into the lab, exposing them to the environment. Because the way we look at it, this is our future workforce. We need these folks. It's a challenge, especially in this geography. I mean, part of the questions that were asked of us in the context of this market space, this geography in Southern California, affordable housing. It's really tough to attract and retain employees once they have a significant other in a family to enter the housing market here in the Southern California. So affordable housing. There's another JPL associate here with me this evening, and we were trading notes on what day did we leave the lab to drive out here. I'm being facetious, but also transportation infrastructure investments, because I can attract and retain you, but I got to tell you, driving yourself around, and even Uber Air, and I'm not endorsing Uber by any stretch of the imagination, but even a product like that, is that going to change the constraints of the geography with respect to local transportation? I mean, George and I were just in New York, 2.5 weeks ago. Manhattan can transport about 1 million people a day from Westchester County, Southern Connecticut, and Northern New Jersey. It doesn't always work smoothly, but they do it every single day. The market opens, commerce happens. I can't drive down here in less than 2 hours, typically. So those are the kind of the two big long poles in the tent. And that's going to be a challenge for us as major employers, and then also small businesses, to bring people in and retain them.
So maybe if I can just add one other thing, and I think it's great, and I'd certainly recommend anybody go to a science fair. I'm on the engineering advisory board for Santa Clara, and I would go and judge the senior design competition. And if you ever want to feel bad about yourself and how smart you are, go watch those kids do stuff. I mean, it's eye-watering. But the thing I would turn around is, so when I worked at Loral, we would invite the families and their guests whenever we had a launch, and we would televise it. And, most of the time I was in the Mission Control Center and didn't get to see it. But one particular launch, I actually happened to be out there, and to watch those kids look at that big rocket, when those engines light, and, you see all that smoke pouring out from the back of the rocket, and it start to move, 3 or 4 or 5 tons of stuff into an orbit. I mean, it really gets their attention. And so we do really cool things. And what I would talk to kids, I'd say, you can go design an app. That's great. But Do you put something out at 23,000 nautical miles? Do you build products that keep the world safe? Do you build products that can absolutely change the course of humanity? And the answer is no. You got to come here if you want to do that. And so we as industry people have to do a better job about exposing what we do and letting kids know just how cool we are. So that's my pitch.
Thank you, Paul. We have another question over here.
Yes. Hello? Hear me? Yep. My name's Chris Belknap, and I'm an architect. Some of my career has been in Dubai, China, designing some of the largest cities in the world. So I have a proposition, and it's the reason I drove up here from Dana Point in quite a considerable traffic jam. Red lights all the way. I was surfing earlier. That was a lot more fun. So here's the proposition. Right above Edwards is a very large piece of land called California City. It's an incorporated city of 203 square miles. There's 14,000 people that live on that city today. What if that was the hub for exactly what you guys are doing to get to Mars, to explore the solar system, etc., for the next 20 years, 100 years? And that we built the infrastructure to do what the Apollo space program did in that new city, which I tentatively am calling Mars Explore City. And not only that, that city is the first carbon neutral, smart tech city connected by Hyperloop throughout connecting California cities together in the United States. This is the critical issue of our time. If you go to Mars in the next 10 years or so, and we don't have a sustainable planet, you might as well be thinking that you're in Jamestown. We have to do both. And I know that these people in this room are some of the most creative, innovative, visionary people in the world. I have something to contribute to that conversation. George, I'd like to talk to you after the meeting, and I'd also like you to respond to what I just said. Mars Explore City in California City, Incorporated City, just above Edwards, right next to LA, connected by Hyperloop. It would explode everything that you've just been talking about. Explode is not the right word. Accelerate.
I was just about to make the same joke, but you beat me to it. We have a bunch of folks who live in Cal City. It's not far from Mojave where we operate. But I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate the discipline. Architecture is one of the, I think, like engineering, is one of these disciplines where you get to the privilege of bringing together many disciplines on the thing. I had two responses. Number one is I agree with your vision. You've got an exciting vision, and one of the things that inspires me as somebody in space is the idea that we need to transmit to our kids as a spaceship builder that we're on the biggest spaceship that we know, and it's a remarkable spaceship. It's basically been supporting life by itself for multiple billion years, moderating temperature, climate. It's an incredible spaceship. We need to teach the engineers of the future and the scientists of the future and the humanists of the future and the artists of the future and the architects of the future that we can all participate in the design of the future spaceship Earth, because for better or for worse, we're at a point in our species history where we can actually start impacting that on a global scale, on a spaceship scale. So I'm fully agreeing with you on that vision. I think I'd appreciate the chance to talk to you. I live in Lancaster, which is technically, I think, LA County. Yes, it is. All right. And so is Palmdale. And, Lancaster and many parts of the desert are actually a really interesting place to experiment. Lancaster passed the first bit of legislation that said new build residential construction has to have solar on the roof. And so there's actually plenty of power up in the desert. And I think that there is a chance to demonstrate certain technologies. And God knows we need a Hyperloop up to Palmdale, Lancaster, and both helping those poor folks who have to drive down the 14 every day, but also potentially pulling people out into the desert so they can participate in the exciting technologies that are out there now, whether it's space or energy or other things. So I think it's an exciting vision that you have, and I'd love to talk with you afterwards.
Thank you. We have a question here from LMU.
Hi, my name is Nola Wanta, and I am not an engineer, but I do come from the College of Business at Loyola Marymount University. And so as you're looking to commercialize space, where do you see the business challenges? Like, what should we be educating our students as we move into this, space commercialization? Thank you.
Risk. Risk is a huge aspect in this business within space. So just being able to map out risk, mitigate those risks, and display the fortitude to continue on, because not every experiment is going to be successful, but it teaches lessons. It's not yet. It's on the cusp of being a vibrant market, but when you look at the biopharma market or telecommunications market, you look at the amount of monies, of capital flowing into those markets over a long period of years, it's hundreds of billions of dollars. The space market is still somewhat nascent. It's in the tens of millions, and billions, excuse me, it's growing. It's growing. But really, you'll see it start to accelerate, and I think, Steve, you mentioned this, when the buy and sell side world comes into it, meaning the hedge funds, the private equity folks, et cetera, but that's only going to happen when the technologies have been de-risked enough and there's a foreseeable business plan that, yes, there is a market for growing human tissue in space. There is a market for doing dirty manufacturing in space. Take it off of the Earth environment and put it into a space environment. But then you've got to develop the infrastructure, the supply chain, and the methodologies to bring those products back to the market. So it's those sorts of architectures that your students should probably, from the business side, be focusing on. The technology side can do these things, but the business community needs to be incorporated and inculcated and brought into the development of that market also.
I guess the thing I'd follow up on as well is when I was a student, it was all about the individual. You go do the problem set, you do it on your own, don't talk to anybody else. That is now totally different. I know you're aware. It's all about teamwork. It's all about back to the architect kind of things. It's the engineers working with the architect, working with the business school. So more and more, I think a lot of the innovation and opportunities come from these sort of multidisciplinary approaches to do it. I think there's a great opportunity, particularly through partnerships with industry, with regards to mentorship programs. I'm a huge fan of internship programs. I think that really pulls out a lot. Universities teaming up with industry to maybe have some prize competitions. I've seen some wonderful things happen when just for $5,000, $10,000, you get teams of students coming together, to bring together, a wonderful ideas. I would also challenge the schools as well, because I think one of the untapped areas within Los Angeles, we got one of the biggest school systems in the nation, and we lose a lot of students K through 12. And somehow through industry and the universities to find up ways to team up to get a lot of these first generation students who many times we lose them at the very moment when we could just pull them in. And I think through the business schools, the engineering schools, and at the presidents of these universities, I think there's a huge opportunity of untapped potential. One last thought on the California city. One of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about is what makes Silicon Valley Silicon Valley. There's something about the magic of the financial, intellectual, technological that comes together. And what is it that would be needed to create that same kind of what I would call a space beach or a space valley kind of activity here in the Los Angeles area? I personally believe a lot of it is fueled through the school systems and getting students that get excited, that through the engineers that leave the Aerospace Corporation or Virgin or SpaceX or what have you, that go off and strike it on their own, but they decide that they want to do it here. How do we create that kind of environment? I think is a wonderful challenge for the LAEDC to really focus on.
There's a popular venture capitalist a few years ago, actually a couple years ago, he said, every big idea has been thought of in the Valley. And so if you think you've got a good idea, somebody else has thought of it. And I think it's hard to find where those problems are now. They're very deep inside infrastructure and within industries. So I believe in encouraging business students to learn more about some of the more complex sectors, peeling back how those operations work and where they can bring their experience into those operations. I'm a big fan of working with most of the schools. I'm not talking to LMU, and I'd love to get more involved, but USC, UCLA, Harvey Mudd, Caltech, they all have different versions of how they want to promote entrepreneurship, get people thinking about applying business-skilled students to behave as an entrepreneur in residence or a mentor to help some of the more technical people get a little bit more savvy. And you never know what matches can happen and what companies can come out of that. So I think there's an incredible opportunity to get involved with all of us. I'll come and do a talk to your school. I'd love to do that kind of stuff, so please.
I just wanted to add one thing to it. I think there's another aspect of education, and that's getting back to understanding risk tolerance. Because what we do when we go to space, I mean, when I used to talk to, one of the things I had to do in my job many years ago was to buy launch insurance and convince insurance companies that we were a safe bet to put a satellite into orbit. But the fact of the matter is, I knew when I was talking to those guys that were placing hundreds of millions of dollars of bets that there are so many moving parts in that rocket, all working at temperatures that are minus 250 degrees and lower. And it's a miracle that those things ever work, but they do. And it's because we have good engineers, we have good manufacturing technology, but we can't be paralyzed when there's a failure, because the failures are visible, they're big, and sometimes very costly. But we have to learn how to, understand what those risks are and be able to grow from them and not become paralyzed. Because, I was there. I was actually on the Mission Control Center when we lost the Challenger, and a couple of I was working for the Air Force at the time, and we lost a couple of expendables right after that, and it literally brought the entire space enterprise, to its knees from a period of about 1986 to about 1987, and it profoundly affected the way we looked at things. But part of it is we got to start thinking about how we deal with that risk and how we manage that risk. So I would say risk management and risk tolerance is something you got to get your students thinking about.
Thank you, gentlemen. What I'm hearing tonight a lot is sort of this workforce development from sort of the student level, the educational level. And I just want to mention that the LAEDC does partner with industry and educational institutions to develop the talent needed. And Jessica Kim, right back there, Director of Workforce Partnerships. So please look to her for some connections. And again, thank you so much to this wonderful panel. It's been a pleasure and eye-opening talking to you guys.
And I'll just wrap us up quickly by thanking Linda for doing a marvelous job moderating the conversation. I want to thank all the presenters tonight for the candor of their presentations, for the inspirational nature of their presentations, for the big risks they take, the big vision they have, and for giving us a sense of where this industry is going and how it will impact all of our lives in the future. You may want to stick around and have some one-on-one conversations if our speakers have time for that. If you enjoyed this kind of conversation, we're going to continue it in a broader look at our entire economy on February 19th at our annual LADC Economic Forecast. I hope you'll all come and join that event. Also know there's an industry council focused on aerospace and defense and space commercialization at the LADC with hundreds of companies and educational institutions and others working together to develop the relational infrastructure necessary to accelerate the growth in this industry. Thank you all for being here tonight. Look forward to seeing you at the next Future Forum and the next forecast.